Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where we're going to talk about food preservation, specifically the making of sauerkraut. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty details of actually making our sauerkraut, I want to talk a minute about how this fits into homesteading and traditional lifeways in general. Before the days of going to a grocery store and purchasing all of your perishable vegetables in little freezer packets that you could just pop in the microwave, you had to grow them in your garden and then save them somehow. Now, some things root cellar really well, right? Like turnip roots, potatoes, winter squash, things like that. You can just root cellar, easy peasy. Other things, the more perishable stuff that you can't just pack in sawdust and store for months on end, needs some deliberate preservation work done with it. Okay? One way to do this is simply to dry them, right? If you want to take your turnip greens, you can cut off the turnip root, pop that in a root cellar, then take the greens and just hang them up and dry them and powder them and put them in soups and stews and whatnot. Okay? It works really well. There's no technique to it. Just tie string around them and hang them in your pantry. Done. Okay? But you can't really do the same with a head of cabbage. It's another step more perishable. You can't hang a head of cabbage in your root cellar and dehydrate, or in your pantry and dehydrate it, sorry. Right? Not going to work. So we need a way of preserving this, since that brings us to the second traditional method of preservation, which is fermentation. Okay? The principle of fermentation is to acknowledge that a foodstuff is sufficiently perishable that some microorganism will grow upon it. So when you're preparing a ferment, you want to make certain that you are preparing this in a way that what grows upon your foodstuff is beneficial and not deleterious. And then the sheer abundance and presence of all of these beneficial microorganisms will displace and prevent the dangerous buggers from getting in and establishing themselves, just for lack of food and lack of room. Okay? Now, it's not just vegetables that this is done with, and it's not just Germanic sauerkraut, right? You have kimchi and all sorts of other lacto-fermented fleshy vegetables. And it's a practice which spans the world. But meats have been fermented, such as pepperoni is a fermented sausage, right? Cheeses are fermented, kefir, yogurt, all of these things are fermented, and it's all that same principle. You're saying, I know microorganisms will grow in this foodstuff, I'll make sure that I get the good ones to grow, displacing the bad ones. So we're doing an example here of sauerkraut. Traditionally cabbage, and everybody's familiar with a big head of cabbage. But we could also come right back to Mr. Turnip, and we could use these greens to make sauerkraut. Right? It's just, a turnip is just a cabbage that was selected to have a fleshy root instead of a fleshy leaf bud. Okay? We can use kale. We can use the leaves from this Brussels sprout to, we can pop these off and put them in our sauerkraut. This is just kale by another name, right? So any of these leafy green cruciferous things will, they all will sauerkraut, okay? So I'm going to do a little bit of a mixture. We're going to use mostly cabbage, but I have a few of these kicking around, so we'll make a little bit of this just for fun. And we're going to do this in canning jars. Now, canning jars are a more modern take on the sauerkraut process, right? Canning jars and the production and manipulation thereof is a modern technology. Canning is not an old way, it's a modern way, right? Including home canning. But the old way of doing sauerkraut is to get big giant crocks, pound everything into the big giant crock, and then keep the water level up above the cabbage. It will develop a film of mold on top, and that mold is actually what ends up sealing the jar. So you pull the moldy stuff off, go in, get the good stuff underneath, eat it, and put your moldy layer back on. That's a little bit distasteful for most modern households, let alone finding the giant crocks and having a place to store them where they're not going to get kicked over in the way. So I'm going to use canning jars in homage to modern circumstances and show you how to do sauerkraut that way. So the first thing we need to do is chop our material up, and a couple ways to do it. The old school way is obviously hand chopping, and that will give you a really coarse material. Okay. If you want finer sauerkraut, you can use a food processor with a large, coarse blade, or you can use a mandolin cutter, such as one of these. They will all work, but you don't need anything fancy. You can just chop it with a knife. Okay. And break it down into whatever size dimension you prefer. If you use the more modern tools, you will get a finer shred of sauerkraut. You do not, I repeat, do not want to take this down as fine as coleslaw. It will turn into mush during the processing component. Okay? Now, if you're using some of these other leafy green materials, like this is our Brussels sprout leaves, and underneath here some of the washed turnip leaves. Okay, a little dead leaf in there. Now for this, you pretty much have to do it with a knife. A food processor is not going to give you a real nice result with this as your starting material. Another little dead leaf in there. Okay. So when you're using some of these other vegetables, you certainly want to go back to the old-fashioned way here. Okay. And set that aside. I've just got a couple more. Chop them up. Okay. There we go. So now we have shredded all of our cabbage and leafy green veggies. Let's stuff them in some jars. So the next step is just to unceremoniously get all of this stuff stomped into the jars. So funnel helps. Funnel's not totally necessary. If you don't have a funnel, you can get it in without. But it is a handy thing to have a funnel. And you'll notice as this stuff is going in, there's a whole lot of airspace in there. So we need to have some sort of pounder. This is an old antique. You don't need an old antique. You can use a wooden spoon with a big fat handle. You can use a clean stick. Don't overthink it. Be creative. Find something to pound the cabbage in. Just keep layering it in until you run out of space in your jar. Okay. Go into some of these finer shreds now. From the food processor. I like the bigger chunks personally. Some of my family like the smaller chunks, so we're doing a little bit of both. Okay. And there's a jar ready to go for the next step. We'll do this one with our alternate packing here. Asking the question, will it kraut? Don't worry, it'll kraut. chop that one up another time. That is the head of the Brussels sprout plant. It's got a little bit of woody stuff in there. You're going to make a mess when you do this. Just embrace it. Just embrace it. I'm good at making messes, aren't I, hon?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can verify.
My wife can verify. I'm good at making messes. I'm just going to finish off the top with some of the head cabbage. Am I as good at cleaning them up?
Nope.
No? No.
Nope.
Darn it.
Nope.
Darn it.
You have gotten better, though.
Oh, thank you, hon. Top it off a little bit here. Okay. And then that jar's done. Mixed varieties. We'll see how it looks when it's all done. Okay. Now, I have just a little bit more of this cabbage. I'm going to finish stuffing that into jars, and then I'll show you the next step. So, we have all of these jarred up. We have 6 jars here in total. And now we need to add a couple things to them. The first thing, and some recipes call for this, some don't, is a tablespoon of sugar. Now, the purpose of adding sugar to this is to feed the good bacteria. If you add more sugar, you will get more acidity. If you add less sugar, you will get less acidity. There's a variety of recipes. Okay? And then the second is salt. Again, we want to modify the medium such that we are fostering the growth of the good bacteria and inhibiting the growth of the bad. This will also do that. And then the third thing we want to do is add boiling water over the top of each of these. In part, this is to make sure that we dissolve our sugar and salt. And in part, this is going to partially pasteurize, not sterilize, but pasteurize the contents of our jar. The good bacteria are better able to withstand this than the bad. I only had enough water for 3 of them, so I'll need to make a little bit more. The good bacteria are better able to withstand this treatment than the bad guys are. So this helps, again, foster that. And then lastly, we're going to put a little loose lid over this. Now that can be can you hand me one of those blue lids, beloved? That can be just a reused lid like one of these. That can be it's like these are just reused mayonnaise jar lids. That can be a Classico spaghetti sauce jar lid. And I don't do a whole lot of brand mentioning, but I will give a shout out to Classico because they actually use standard rims and standard lids. So you get a free jar for and a free lid for everything of spaghetti sauce. So anytime we have to buy spaghetti sauce at the store, we buy theirs just for that reason. Or this could be an official ball jar white plastic lid. What we want is we want the lid to just kind of grab a little and just sit there, but not be tight. It should be loose. If you seal this up, it can build up gases and literally explode the jar. You don't want that. You want this to just sit on top and keep dust from getting in there, but not actually seal. Okay? Which brings us to the last thing that works, and that is some tin foil across the top, just loose pressed around the top of the jar. You can use a tin foil lid for this stage. Any of it work. I'm going to go ahead, make some more water, finish these off, and then we set them aside for 2 weeks to ferment. And I will see you then. Okay, it's been about 3 weeks since we started these little jars of sauerkraut, and it's progressed nicely. So we got busy in the middle. We just haven't had time to look back or work with this, and that's okay. The whole point of making sauerkraut is that it will keep for an extended period of time just in normal, cool conditions. Okay? It doesn't need a whole lot of fancy, and it's not like you're on a time schedule. You don't have to do this and then immediately can it up 2 weeks later. It's like, no, that's missing the whole point of sauerkraut, right? The whole point of sauerkraut is that you can take some cabbage, you can cover it, you can jam it in a big giant crock, and it will be fine through most of the winter, as long as it's stored at a stable, cool temperature. Now, those crocks are not as available in modern times as before, so that's why we did this in canning jars, to show a second method. If you do it in a crock, it's the same idea, you just scale it up, and then you really have to store it at, just in a stable, cool conditions. If you do this in canning jars, you can process them in a canner, we're going to talk about that here in a minute, and store them just absolutely indefinitely under any circumstances. So in modern time, this is a very good solution. Now, when you're done with your fermentation, one thing that will happen is, and you can see it in this one with sort of our mixed green sauerkraut, that the fermentation will boil some of the water up. You want to make sure you have this on some sort of catch pan or tray or dish to catch that. And this one boiled over a little bit. So when you want to ask, is it done, give it a sniff test. It smells nice and acidic and like a pickle and like sauerkraut. Give it a little flavor test. Tastes like a nice sauerkraut. And then you either store it or can it. Either way, we want to cover this back up. Add a little water in here. I'm spilling. Okay, I'll clean that up later. Just water. So this is just some clean water that I brought over for exactly this purpose. And then, I already checked all of these to make sure they were nice and done and flavorful and delicious. You can add whatever other flavors or seasonings you want. You can make spicy sauerkraut. You could add pepper. You could add more salt if you want it. You don't need it. But I like to add a little bit of a sploosh, use a technical term, of some balsamic vinegar, just because I enjoy the flavor of that. It'll also make it a little bit more acid, and when you're canning, acidity is your friend. That's what inhibits botulism growing and lets you do this in a water bath. Now, again, the fermentation bubbles over a little bit of the sauerkraut juice, so we want to take a nice clean wet paper towel and wipe the rim of all of these jars. Okay? Otherwise, often your lids won't seal. Okay? I'm just going to take a minute, and cleanliness is your friend. It's sadly very common for these to not seal if you have any sort of contamination right up along the rim. Okay, now we need our rings, we need our lids. These lids I just had in some boiling water, clean them off good, and it helps soften the rubber ring, but also makes them a little trickier to get out of there without burning your fingers.
I also use tongs a lot of the time to get them out.
Yeah, I just like the fork method when I do it, but tongs work too. Try to balance them on a fork quick, get them there. my fingers are leathery enough, I can do that without killing them. You want to make sure these rings are on quite tight. Okay. These are going to go in the water bath, and they're very acid in here, so we don't need, full aseptic technique. I'm going to pause the camera for a minute. We'll get repositioned over to the canner. Okay, and the jars have magically teleported over to the stovetop. We're going to put them in the canner now. The first thing we need to do is, in the bottom of the canner, we need to put a rack to keep them up off the bottom. If the jars get right against the bottom of the pot, there's a risk of having them crack just from the heat. So we're going to put that rack in there, just a spacer. And now this water is warm, but it's not at a full boil. Again, we want to try to minimize heat shock on the jars. So I like to put them in when the water's a little bit below the boil. It just kind of helps with that. These canning jar tongs are readily available at any store that sells canning jar supplies. And we're going to put them in. And you want to make sure that the water is just a little bit above the jar. I'm going to need to add a bit more water to this batch. Okay. Actually, no, I won't. They've displaced enough. The water is right just about an inch above the jars. Good. So now we just cover them up. I'm going to let this come to a full rolling boil. Once it's at a full rolling boil, I will start a 1/2 hour timer. Okay? And I will can them for 1/2 hour in the hot water bath after it comes to a full rolling boil, right? The time does not start now, it starts after it comes to a full rolling boil. And this will work. This is a fairly standard hot water treatment. It will further soften those rings, allow the lid to seal down on the rubber ring around the edge of the lid, allow that to seal down and seal to the top of the jar, and fully sterilize this material. This process won't get every last microbe spore, but it will get all free living vegetative growth. It will kill all of that off. And the fact that we have fermented these and turned them fully acidic will prevent any spores from germinating. Right? It's just not good conditions for bacterial growth anymore. That's the purpose of the fermentation. I still have 2 jars over there that we're just keeping out because we're going to use them next week. Again, that'll be a month from when we started, but that's just fine. That's the point of sauerkraut. These are going to go on the shelf for longer term storage where we don't need to worry about them or have them take up space in the kitchen, right? We can just stuff them in a pantry and not care. So both options are good. I'm going to let these cook. We're going to tie them for the 1/2 hour, and then I'll show you the final result. If you're enjoying this video, I hope that you would go ahead and give it a thumbs up, but I'd be most grateful if you did so the YouTube algorithm knows to show it to others. What I definitely am giving a thumbs down is one of my jars broke. This is a thing that happens when you can. Sometimes the bottoms will pop off. It's heat shock. This is even a brand name jar, which is sad. We use and reuse and reuse and reuse and reuse these jars. This could be a relatively new one, or this could be 40 years old from my grandmother's canning. Who knows, right? So it's sad when it happens. It's sad that you lose a jar, but it is a thing that's going to happen from time to time when you do canning. So I just thought I would mention that and show it that this was a slightly imperfect exercise because of that. The rest worked well. This lid gets hot. I'll use the tongs to pull it off. Turn off our heat. Then we'll look at our jars. Okay. That one was nice. One nice. This one worked. Now, I think these were a little bit too full because I'm seeing some bulging on the lids, which I don't like. But it's also not the end of the world. I'll move this over so that you can see. And now we just leave these jars to set here until the lids pop. So as this material cools back down, it's going to suck, and the little raised middle in the top of the lid will suck down. That's how you know it was successfully canned. If the lids bulge up a little bit, that happens from time to time, especially on lower quality lids. In and of itself, it's not a problem unless it wrinkles the steel and prevents it from popping and pulling down. You'll know. If it pops, it was a successful jar. If it doesn't pop, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the contents, it just means you need to use that one right away. So the ones, the one or two in each batch or every other batch that don't pop, if you have that happen, that's just tonight's dinner, right? That's how you pick the ones to use and the ones that are versus the ones that are stable for a long time. Because this is always a possibility, if you're going to use it quickly, don't can it. Like I said, this will keep for a month, 2 months easily just in these jars in a cool place. So if you're going to use it imminently, don't bother canning it, don't risk losing the material or losing a jar. Only can it when you want to put it away for long-term storage. Mm-hmm. So, one of the nice things about these kind of lacto ferments is that they, that for medium range storage, you don't need to do this. But I wanted to show the full process so that you can see multiple options on how to make and handle sauerkraut. So, I hope that you will have a wonderful, blessed day and join us here next time at Old Ways Rising Farm.